finish off my Big Ten preview, I'll go through 174, 184, 197 in heavyweight. At 174, this isn't a terribly deep weight class in the Big Ten. I think Mark Hall at number one is way ahead of the rest of the field. But then you have Miles Amin, Mikey Labriola, Dylan Leidy, Skatska, Smith, Hughes, Grello, Bowman, and a few others. Johnny Sebastian's on this list, but I believe he's done for good now. Had a serious injury, and I think his college wrestling career is over, unfortunately. So looking at the list, I guess a lot could happen in the lower stages because a lot of these guys are capable of beating one another, but I think Hall and Amin are probably Labriola, I guess, has potential to beat Amin there, but I'm actually just going to skip right ahead to the semifinals here and assume that we're going Hall with Skatska or Leidy. I pick Hall to win there, and then Amin versus Labriola. Potential there for an upset, but I think you're going to have to go with Amin and then Hall versus Amin. I have to go with Mark Hall, defending national champion. It's just this isn't a terribly deep weight class for the Big Ten. Their weight classes like 133 that are extremely deep. 174 is not the case. I think Mark Hall should have a fairly easy go of it. At 184, we're looking at Miles Martin at number one. He's also number one in the nation. Taylor Venz, Emery Parker, Shakur Rasheed, Cash Wilkie, Jelani Embry, Caffey, Mason Reinhardt, Gravina is down there, and a few others. As far as how I'd see the round of 8 going, you'd have Miles Martin against Reinhardt or Conley. I think you probably have to. I think Reinhardt's going to be the guy there. Miles Martin should get a win there and probably gets bonus points. Taylor Venz versus Caffey or Gravina. I think there's a real potential for Gravina to sneak in there and face off against Taylor Venz, but I have to pick Taylor Venz, though he has been susceptible to upsets. Emery Parker against Jelani Embry or Max Lyon. I'd have to pick Jelani Embry. He's shown some nice flashes this year. I think this is actually going to be a tough match for Emery Parker. I'm not picking there to be any bonus points, but I think Emery Parker is going to have to be the guy to get it done here. And then with Shakur Rasheed and Cash Wilkie. Wilkie does have a victory over Taylor Venz. It was kind of a weird finish at the end where it seemed like Venz wasn't completely aware of the score. But either way, to keep it close to the number 2 seed and actually get the win there is pretty impressive. With that being said, he's also lost some matches where you would have expected better from him. I think with him being seated kind of around like the 12 to 15 area nationally, that kind of makes sense for him. He has a ceiling, or he has a pretty high ceiling, but he doesn't always get there. So with him versus Shakur Rasheed, we haven't seen Rasheed beat anyone all that significant at 184 this year, but he did have a lot of big wins at 197. Ended up taking 197 away from a guy right now who's ranked number 3 at heavyweight, which is kind of crazy to think that a guy who's number 4 at 184 this year beat out a guy who's number 3 in the nation at 285 for this year. But that's how it all worked out. So I think with Rasheed, he hasn't really had the chance to prove that he's an elite guy, a guy who you should be picking as an All-American yet, but this Big Ten tournament is going to give him a few opportunities here, starting with the quarterfinal match against Cash Wilkie, assuming that there aren't any upsets. And I think you probably have to go with Shakur Rasheed there, though Wilkie obviously is a very live underdog. That would mean that in your semifinals, you have Miles Martin and Shakur Rasheed. That'll probably be a close match. I don't think it's going to go to bonus points, but I would pick Miles Martin. And then Taylor Venz and Emery Parker. I would have to go... I mean, Emery Parker's a tough guy to pick against. Venz did get the better of him, and that's why I see it ahead of him right now. But there's definitely Venz is a guy who is susceptible to upsets. Emery Parker's a tough guy to beat over and over, and I actually think Emery Parker is going to be able to get that win back. So it would be Emery Parker and Miles Martin, and then I would have to go with Miles Martin there in the finals. So Miles Martin would then be the Big Ten champion at 184. Moving up to 197. This is kind of a Bo Nickel next topic type of thing, but let's look at the rest of the rankings. You have Colin Moore at number 2. Who got pinned by Bo Nickel. Jacob Warner, who is one of these guys where you know that he's got a really high ceiling, but in college it seems like he beats Willie Miklas in the top of the rankings, but then everyone else seems to get over on him, including Preston Weigel at the Oklahoma State meet. But then you have Brunner from Purdue, Schultz, Strigo, Wilton, Carenti, and the rest of them. As far as how I see this going, there could be a lot of potential for movement within 3 to 14. I think Warner probably gets to the semifinals here, but there is potential for upset. So if we're looking at the quarterfinals, assuming that there aren't any major upsets, you'd be looking at Bo Nickel versus Carenti or Anderson. Nickel, you have to pick him, obviously. Colin Moore versus Wilton or Bresky. I think there's a good chance that Bresky ends up being the guy to slide in there, but even still, Colin Moore should have the edge. Jacob Warner versus Strigow or Chaconis. He did beat Chaconis. And then as far as Strigo goes, that'll be a tough match for him, but I think that you probably have to go Jacob Warner there. I think he's just really good on top, and we'll be able to at least I think he'll probably at least score a couple takedowns and then be able to control enough from top to grind out the clock and get a regular decision win here. And then with Brunner and Schultz, potential for either of those guys to win that match. I'd go Brunner. So then you'd be looking at Nickel versus Brunner. You'd have to go Nickel, and then Moore versus Warner. I would love to see Jacob Warner get a big win here against Colin Moore. This would be another guy to add to the list of names of guys who are in that All-American range that he's actually beaten. But I just have a hard time picking him right now based off of a lot of what I've seen from him of late. So I'd have to go with Colin Moore. So then you have Colin Moore versus Bo Nickel in the finals. Bo Nickel just pinned Colin Moore. Is he going to pin him again? Possibly. But even if he doesn't pin him, I think this is going to be a pretty dominant win for Bo Nickel, and it's hard to pick against Bo Nickel at this point anyway. So that moves us to 285 for the final weight. This is the weight that a lot of people expect Gable Steveson to dominate, not just this year, but for years to come. So he's the number 1 seed. You got Cassar at number 2, Hilger at 3, Stoll at 4, Conan Jennings 5, Mason Parris 6, and then you start to get a little bit of a drop off there with Chase Singletary, Yusuf Hamida, David Jensen, Kristen Colucci, with Deuce all the way down at 14. As far as possible upsets, I guess there's a lot of possible upsets there. Jensen versus Hamida is going to be really interesting. Colucci versus Singletary. Singletary has won some big matches, lost some big matches. I don't know if Fletcher Miller is going to knock off Mason Parris, though, assuming that these are the seeds. And then Avon and Jennings. Jennings has lost to Deuce, who is the number 14 seed before. But it's kind of hard to tell with him. Sometimes he wins matches you don't expect him to, and sometimes he loses matches that you would expect him to win. But looking at what would the likely quarterfinals be, you'd be looking at Gable Steveson versus Hamida or Jensen. I'm assuming it's going to be Jensen, but even still, Gable should win that match and get some bonus points in the process. Anthony Cassar versus Chase Singletary or Christian Colucci. I think it's probably going to be Singletary, but again, Cassar has been so dominant this year. He won that match already. I'd see him winning it again. Trent Hilger versus Mason Parris. Tough match. I think with the way those two match up, and I don't remember if these guys have actually gone at it this year, because Parris is a guy who can beat some top guys. He did beat Desi already. But I think you probably have to go with Hilger here, but Parris would be a live underdog. Sam Stoll and Conan Jennings. Sam Stoll already beat Conan Jennings. It was sort of a bizarre match where Stoll was about to turn Jennings, and then Jennings appeared to get injured and seemed to be in a lot of pain. Was almost in tears on the sidelines, and then came back rather quickly. So I'm not sure what was going on with that, but if this is the matchup that actually works out very well for Sam Stoll, assuming that he's able to get past Christian Ribataro, which I think he can. So this is the seeding for Stoll. This could actually be very beneficial because there's a lot of landmines in here for Sam Stoll. Sam Stoll, though he's ranked number 4 according to Flow's rankings, did lose to the number 9 guy in David Jensen. Plus he had that loss to Derek White pretty recently. But if he also lost to Hilger as well. But if Stoll ends up facing a guy like Conan Jennings in the semis, a guy who he already beat in Conan's own house, Sam Stoll could be in the semis, and that could help him a lot with the seeding because he was moving into this season. He was actually a guy who was ranked number 1 at the start of the year. I think a lot of people expected Gable to be better than him, but Gable hadn't proven anything yet, so you had to give Sam Stoll the number 1 seed. But for him, this season's been pretty poor for him. It's hard to say whether it's more to do with the knee injury, if there were some complications with the gunshot wound, or what exactly happened. But this hasn't been as expected for him. But if the seeding goes or as slow as it has it written out, there's a potential for him to find his way into the semifinals, which is pretty big for him. But that would then put him against Gable Steveson. I think that's a terrible matchup for him. Stevenson's probably going to be able to blow right through him and ride him out. Could potentially be a pin for Gable. Could also see bonus points for Gable. And then you'd have Cassar versus Hilger. Could be a tight match, but I think Cassar is going to win that one. And then you'd have Gable versus Cassar. 2 athletic heavyweights, but Gable's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, and I'd have to give him the edge there and pick Gable to win Big Tens and then go into the NCAAs, where I would have to see him winning that as well. He's a guy who he may have a peer at some point soon, but right now, looking at who's in the NCAA heavyweight division, there doesn't appear to be a guy who's going to really test him all the way up until the third and potentially knock him off with a late takedown. Seems like he's going to run through most of the guys he faces.